In 480 before Christ, Persian soldiers climbed the north slope of the Acropolis, set fire to every temple standing on its summit, and buried an entire generation of sacred marble in ash and rubble. Athenians returning after the Battle of Salamis found their city in charred silence. And yet, within a single generation, they raised upon that same scorched rock the most celebrated building in the history of Western architecture. How does a city not merely survive destruction, but answer it with perfection? That question drives everything you are about to witness. This is the complete story of Athens, told from its very beginning to its rediscovery beneath Ottoman houses in the modern age. We will stand on bare limestone 5,000 years before the Common Era, when the first Neolithic families dug wells into the north slope and shaped crude pottery beside natural springs. We will watch a Mycenaean palace rise on the summit, its cyclopean walls enclosing a secret staircase descending 6 flights to reach water no enemy could cut off. We will move through the centuries of silence that followed palatial collapse, when scattered villages buried their dead in the Kerameikos with monumental amphorae painted by the Dipylon master. Then the city awakens. Solon cancels the debts of enslaved farmers. Pisistratos seizes power 3 times and builds fountains and temples. Cleisthenes shatters the old aristocratic tribes and invents something the world has never seen: a government chosen by lot and assembly, accountable to ordinary citizens, scratching names on pottery shards. We will walk the Panathenaic way as it processes through the Agora, past the law courts where 6,000 jurors cast bronze ballots, past the Stoa where Socrates argued, upward through the Propylaea to the Parthenon, where Pheidias's 11-meter gold and ivory Athena caught the morning light. We will witness the plague that killed Pericles and a quarter of the population. We will hear the long walls fall under Spartan hammers. We will see philosophers teaching in sacred groves while Macedonian garrisons occupy the harbours. Roman emperors will complete temples left unfinished for 7 centuries. Herulian raiders will burn the lower city. And finally, in 1687, a Venetian mortar shell will strike the Parthenon, by then an Ottoman ammunition store, and blow its centre into the sky. What makes Athens unlike any other ruin is this: the ideas born in its streets did not die with its stones. Every parliament, every jury, every citizen who votes inherits something first practiced on the Pnyx Hill, where farmers and potters raised their hands to decide war and peace. The concept that ordinary people could govern themselves was not inevitable. It was invented here, on specific ground, by specific men whose names we know and whose broken pottery we can hold. And for centuries that ground lay buried. Medieval Athens shrank to a village. The Parthenon became a church, then a mosque. It was not until 1831 that archaeologists began peeling back Ottoman houses above the ancient Agora, uncovering over 7,000 ostraca, the very shards on which Athenians had scratched the names of men they wished to exile. Democracy left its fingerprints in fired clay, and we found them. If you value complete journeys through the great cities of antiquity, told with patience and precision from first settlement to final excavation, subscribe to follow this series. Each week we bring back a world built in limestone, marble, and bronze, one city at a time. Now let us begin where Athens itself began, with a flat-topped rock rising from the Attic plain, visible from the sea, blessed with water, and waiting for the first hands to shape it into something sacred. Long before the marble, before the temples, before the word democracy existed in any language, there is only the rock. A flat-topped mass of grey limestone rises 30 stories above the Attic plain, its cliffs sheer on 3 sides, approachable only from the west where the slope gentles into a saddle. This is the Acropolis, not yet named, not yet sacred, but already chosen. The logic of the choice is written in geology. The limestone cap sits atop layers of marl and schist, and where these strata meet, water seeps outward. Springs emerge at the base of the northern cliff, at the Clepsydra fissure on the northwest face, and in smaller seeps along the southern slope. In a landscape where summer burns the riverbeds dry and the Kephisos and Ilissos shrink to dust, these perennial springs mean survival. They are the reason anyone stops here at all. Below the rock, the plain opens in every direction. Olive-grey soil, workable with stone tools, watered enough by winter rains to sustain emmer wheat and barley. To the southwest, barely half a day's walk, the Saronic Gulf offers salt, fish, and the promise of contact with islands visible on clear mornings. To the northeast, the passes of Parnes and Pentelicon channel movement from Boeotia southward, making this plain a natural crossroads. The Acropolis commands all of it. Anyone standing on its summit sees approaching strangers long before those strangers arrive. Sometime around 5,000 years before the Common Era, the first permanent inhabitants make their mark. On the north slope, archaeologists have recovered hand-formed pottery, coarse, undecorated, fired at low temperatures in open pits. Shallow wells cut into the soft rock near the summit testify to deliberate settlement rather than passing encampment. Post holes suggest oval huts with wattle and daub walls and thatched roofs, clustered near the western approach where access is easiest. These Neolithic settlers are not building a city. They are occupying a defensible water source in a fertile basin. Yet every city begins this way, with the recognition that a particular piece of ground offers what human life requires: fresh water, arable soil, sight lines, refuge from violence. Through the 4th and 3rd millennia, the settlement persists. Early Bronze Age ceramics appear in stratified deposits, better fired, sometimes burnished to a dark sheen. Stone tools give way slowly to copper. The population remains small, perhaps a few dozen families, but the occupation is continuous. No catastrophic break appears in the archaeological record. Generation after generation, people are born on this rock, draw water from these springs, bury their dead in the surrounding soil, and never leave. By the middle of the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, the character of the settlement begins to shift. Pottery styles connect the Acropolis to the wider Aegean world. Minoan influences appear in ceramic forms. The rock is no longer merely a refuge for farmers. It is becoming a node in networks of exchange that stretch across the sea. What happens next will transform it from a hilltop village into a Mycenaean citadel, but that transformation belongs to a later age. For now, in the deep silence of the 5th and 4th millennia, the Acropolis is simply what geography made it, the best place to live within a day's walk in any direction. The springs murmur in their limestone channels. The plain stretches golden under summer heat. The rock waits, patient as only stone can be, for the weight of everything that will be built upon it. Sometime around 1600 before the Common Era, the rock begins to rise in a new way. Not geologically, the limestone has not moved, but architecturally. Massive stones appear on the summit, blocks weighing several tons each, fitted together without mortar in the manner that later Greeks will call Cyclopean, believing only giants could have moved such weight. The Acropolis is becoming a Mycenaean citadel. The transformation reflects a broader revolution sweeping the Aegean. Shaft graves at Mycenae overflow with gold. Warrior lords command networks of trade and tribute stretching from Egypt to the Baltic amber routes. Athens, positioned on the land bridge between the Peloponnese and northern Greece, with its harbour access to the Saronic Gulf, cannot remain a simple farming settlement. It becomes a seat of power. The palace that crowns the Acropolis in this era leaves only fragmentary traces: column bases, patches of painted plaster, fragments of linear B tablets suggesting bureaucratic administration. But the fortification walls survive in sections still visible today, their enormous limestone blocks forming a circuit around the summit plateau. These walls date primarily to the 13th century before the Common Era, a period when Mycenaean citadels across Greece were strengthening their defences, as though sensing the catastrophe approaching from beyond the horizon. The most remarkable engineering achievement of this fortress lies hidden beneath the northern cliff face. A narrow passage, cut directly into the living rock, descends through 6 flights of steep stairs into darkness. At the bottom, nearly 40 meters below the summit, the staircase reaches a cleft where groundwater seeps from the limestone, the same spring system that drew Neolithic settlers 4,000 years earlier. This fountain access shaft guarantees water during siege. Its existence means the citadel can hold even when enemies surround the base. The passage is barely wide enough for one person carrying a water jar. The steps are worn smooth. Torchlight would have flickered against wet stone walls as servants descended into the earth's cold interior, filling vessels in near total darkness before climbing back toward daylight. The engineering required precise knowledge of the rock's geology, where water collects, where the stone can be safely cut without collapse. On the summit, life follows the rhythms of a late Bronze Age palatial centre. Stirrup jars hold perfumed oil for trade. Pottery kilns fire vessels decorated with octopus and nautilus motifs. Bronze weapons are stored in palace magazines. The Megaron, the great hall with its central hearth, serves as throne room and ceremonial centre, though its exact location on the Acropolis remains debated among archaeologists. Below the citadel walls, settlement spreads across the surrounding slopes and plain. Tombs in the area that will later become the Agora contain Mycenaean chamber burials with grave goods, bronze mirrors, ivory combs, ceramic figurines of goddesses with upraised arms. The population serves the palace economy, growing grain, pressing olives, weaving textiles recorded on clay tablets by scribes writing in the syllabic script scholars call Linear B. Then, around 1200 before the Common Era, the system collapses. Across the eastern Mediterranean, palaces burn. Trade networks fracture. The reasons remain debated: drought, invasion, internal revolt, systems failure. At Athens, uniquely, the citadel is not destroyed. Later Athenian tradition will claim the city was never sacked, never conquered during the upheavals that ended the Bronze Age. Archaeology partially supports this. Habitation continues without a clear destruction layer. But the palace administration vanishes. The scribes stop writing. The trade goods cease arriving. The great walls still stand, but the world they were built to command has dissolved. The fountain staircase still descends to its hidden spring, but fewer feet wear its steps. The Acropolis enters a long twilight, still inhabited, still sacred, but no longer the seat of a palace economy. The Cyclopean blocks remain, too massive to dismantle, becoming the foundation upon which every subsequent age will build. They endure there still, visible beneath the marble of the classical temples, silent witnesses to the first time this rock held a fortress worthy of the name. The twilight deepens. Across the 11th century before the Common Era, the Acropolis holds its people but loses its purpose. The palace economy that once directed bronze, oil, and grain through centralized storerooms has collapsed entirely. No more linear B tablets, no more seal impressions pressed into clay. The administrative silence is total. What remains is simpler and harder. Small communities of farmers and herders scattered across the Attic plain, each cluster of houses oriented toward its own burial ground, its own shrine, its own well. Athens does not die, it contracts. And in that contraction, something unexpected begins. The pottery tells the story first. In the graves of the Kerameikos, the great cemetery stretching northwest of the later city walls along the road to Eleusis, a new ceramic tradition emerges by roughly 1050 before the Common Era. Proto-geometric ware replaces the declining Mycenaean styles with startling discipline, precise compass-drawn concentric circles, dark bands of glaze applied with a fast wheel, forms stripped to geometric clarity. These are not crude survivals. They represent a conscious aesthetic reinvention, and Athens is among the earliest centers producing them. The potters working near the clay beds of the Eridanos stream are already shaping a craft identity that will define the settlement for centuries. By the 9th century, the style evolves into full geometric pottery, dense registers of meanders, zigzags, chevrons, and hatched triangles covering every surface. The vessels grow enormous. In the Dipylon cemetery, monumental amphorae and craters stand nearly as tall as a person, serving as grave markers for the aristocratic dead. The work attributed to the painter known as the Dipylon Master, active around 760 before the Common Era, introduces human figures into these geometric fields, mourners flanking a bier, warriors with shield and spear, ships with banks of oars. These are among the earliest narrative scenes in Greek art, and they emerge here in the clay of Athens. Iron appears in the graves alongside the pottery. Swords, spearheads, dress pins, forged from a metal that the Mycenaean world barely used. The shift from bronze to iron is not merely technological. It redistributes power. Iron ore is common across Attica. A village smith can produce weapons and tools without depending on the long-distance tin trade that sustained the Bronze Age palaces. The old monopoly of the citadel dissolves into the landscape. The villages multiply. Settlements at Eleusis, Marathon, Brauron, Thorikos, and Sunion maintain their own cults and burial customs. Attica in the Dark Age is not one city, but a constellation of small communities sharing a dialect, a kinship system, and a reverence for the rock at the center. Later tradition credits the legendary King Theseus with the Sinoikismos, the unification of these scattered villages into a single political body centered on Athens. No historical Theseus can be recovered. but the process the myth describes is real. Gradually, across the 9th and 8th centuries, the Attic communities begin to recognize a common identity, common festivals, a shared hearth on the Acropolis. The physical evidence appears in the Kerameikos itself. By the late 8th century, the cemetery serves not just a local neighborhood, but a broader elite drawing prestige from association with the central settlement. The monumental grave markers signal wealth, lineage, and competitive display, the culture of aristocratic families who will soon call themselves the Eupatridae, the well-born. On the Acropolis, the old Mycenaean walls still stand, but the summit now holds not a palace, but a sacred precinct. The transition is decisive. The rock ceases to be a seat of royal administration and becomes a sanctuary, a place where the goddess dwells. The earliest cult activity dedicated to Athena likely crystallizes during these centuries, though no temple structure survives from before the 7th century. The sacred olive tree, the ancient wooden image, the rituals that will one day become the Panathenea, all have roots reaching into this dark but fertile soil. By 700 before the Common Era, the transformation is complete. Athens is no longer a Mycenaean ruin inhabited by farmers. It is a polis in formation, a community defined by shared cult, shared burial ground, shared identity, and the first stirrings of shared governance. The rock has found its second life, not as a fortress, but as a shrine, not as a palace, but as the center of a city that does not yet know what it will become. The polis stirs, but it does not yet breathe freely. Through the 7th century before the Common Era, Athens is governed by a narrow circle of noble families, the Eupatridae, the well-born, who hold the archonships, control the courts, and interpret the unwritten customs that serve as law. Power passes among a handful of clans. The Agora, still an open clearing below the Acropolis's northwest slope, is not yet paved, not yet lined with civic buildings. It is a gathering ground, a place where free men stand in the dust and listen to judgments they have no formal role in shaping. The land itself becomes an instrument of control. Small farmers borrow against their plots, and when they cannot repay, they forfeit not only their fields but their bodies. Stone markers called horoi stand in the earth, recording debts and claims. A man who defaults may be sold abroad as a slave. Families who have worked the same soil for generations find themselves tenants on land they once owned, surrendering a sixth of their harvest to aristocratic creditors. The countryside fills with bitter silence. Around 621 before the Common Era, a lawgiver named Draco is appointed to codify Athenian custom into written statutes for the first time. The laws he inscribes are famously severe. Later tradition holds that nearly every offense carries the penalty of death, but the act of writing them down is itself revolutionary. Law ceases to be the private knowledge of noble judges. It becomes visible, fixed, subject to public scrutiny. Draco's code does not solve the crisis of debt and dispossession, but it establishes a principle that will prove irreversible. The city's rules belong to the city, not to the memory of its aristocrats. By 594 before the Common Era, Athens stands at the edge of civil war. The poor demand redistribution of land. The wealthy fear revolution. Both sides agree to appoint a single mediator with extraordinary powers. The man chosen is Solon, poet, merchant, and moderate aristocrat. His reforms reshape the foundations of Athenian society. The Seisachtheia, The shaking off of burdens cancels existing debts and forbids the use of a citizen's body as collateral. The heroi are pulled from the earth. Athenians enslaved for debt are freed. Some are brought home from abroad. Solon divides the citizen body into 4 census classes based not on birth, but on agricultural wealth: the Pentakosio Medimnoi, the Hippais, the Zeugitai, and the Thetes. Political office is opened to the upper classes by merit of property rather than bloodline alone. A new council of 400, drawn from the 4 traditional tribes, is established to prepare business for the assembly. The Thetes, the poorest class, gain the right to sit in the assembly and serve on juries, though they cannot yet hold high office. The courts become a space where ordinary citizens judge their peers. The laws are inscribed on rotating wooden frames called axones and displayed publicly, perhaps in the royal stoa at the Agora's edge or in the Parthenon. Citizens can read them, argue over them, appeal to them. Governance begins its slow migration from aristocratic households to civic space. The Agora itself starts to acquire the character of a political centre, a place not merely for commerce and conversation, but for the formal conduct of public life. Solon departs Athens after his reforms, reportedly travelling for 10 years to prevent himself from being pressured to alter his own laws. The city he leaves behind is not yet a democracy. The aristocratic families remain powerful. Factional conflict between the men of the plain, the coast, and the hills will soon produce a new crisis and a new kind of leader, the tyrant. But the architecture of change is already in place: written law, census-based citizenship, public courts, a council that answers to the assembly. The stones of the early Agora are modest: packed earth, a few boundary markers, wooden posts. No marble colonnades yet rise along its edges. But the space has been claimed for a new purpose. It belongs to the polis now, to the idea that governance is a shared act performed in open air, under the gaze of every citizen who cares to watch. The rock above still holds the gods. The ground below begins to hold something else, the first rough framework of a city that will learn, through painful experiment, to govern itself. The crisis arrives not as invasion, but as ambition. Around 561 before the Common Era, a man named Pisistratos, aristocrat, war hero, champion of the hill country poor, seizes the Acropolis with a bodyguard of club-bearers and declares himself master of Athens. He is expelled. He returns, legend claiming he rode into the city beside a tall woman dressed as Athena herself. He is expelled again. He returns a third time, around 546, backed by foreign gold and mercenaries, and this time he stays. The tyranny will endure for nearly 4 decades under him and his sons. Yet what rises from this seizure of power is not ruin, but construction on a scale Athens has never seen. Pisistratos understands that a city must be made to feel like a capital. The packed earth Agora receives its first monumental fountain house, the Enneakrounos, the 9-spouted spring, its water channeled through terracotta pipes from sources east of the city into a stone basin where women fill their hydria jars each morning. For the first time, clean water flows to the people not as a gift of nature alone, but as an act of civic engineering. The sound of it, steady, generous, public, changes the texture of daily life in the lower city. On the Acropolis summit, older temples of timber and limestone give way to grander visions. A large temple to Athena rises on the south side of the rock, its foundations cut deep into bedrock, its columns carved from local stone and painted in reds and blues that blaze against the sky. This structure, what scholars call the older Parthenon's predecessor, or the Hecatompedon, establishes the sacred geometry that every later building will inherit. Marble pediments display painted lions tearing at bulls, coiling serpents, the monstrous Triton. The goddess receives a house worthy of an imperial patron. Below the Acropolis, southeast of the Agora, Pisistratos lays the first foundations for an enormous temple to Olympian Zeus. The scale is staggering, a forest of columns planned in the Doric order, a platform stretching over 100 meters. It will not be finished for 600 years, but the ambition announces itself in the quarried stone, the surveyor's marks, the sheer audacity of the ground plan. The Panathenaic festival, older in origin, now receives its definitive form. Every 4 years the great Panathenaia processes along the sacred way, from the Kerameikos gate through the Agora and up the steep ramp to the Acropolis summit, bearing a newly woven peplos for the ancient olive-wood image of Athena. Athletic victors receive amphora filled with oil from the sacred olive groves, black figure vessels showing Athena striding between columns on one side, the contest on the other. These Panathenaic amphorae, stamped with official authority, travel across the Mediterranean, carrying the name of Athens into every port. The tyrant sons, Hippias and Hipparchos, continue the program after their father's death around 528. Hipparchos patronizes poets. Hermes, stone pillars topped with the head of Hermes, appear at crossroads throughout Attica, inscribed with moral maxims. The city acquires the infrastructure of a great power: roads, water systems, festival calendars, ceramic industries firing thousands of vessels annually in the Kerameikos kilns. Black figure pottery reaches its finest expression in these decades. Exekias painting Ajax and Achilles bent over a game board, every sinew rendered in slip and incision. The kilns glow orange through the night. Smoke drifts across the potter's quarter, carrying the sharp mineral smell of iron oxide slip and burning olive wood. The tyranny builds Athens into something it has never been, a city of spectacle, of engineered water, of monumental religion, of international prestige. The rock above is no longer merely sacred. It is becoming a stage, and the streets below are no longer merely inhabited. They are becoming urban, dense, serviced, proud. When the tyranny falls, as it soon will, the city it leaves behind will be too large, too confident, and too accustomed to public life to accept any master again. The fall comes swiftly. In 510 before the Common Era, a Spartan army marches into Attica at the invitation of Athenian aristocrats, and the tyrant Hippias, son of Pisistratos, ruler grown paranoid and cruel after his brother's assassination, retreats to the Acropolis with his family. Besieged on the rock his father had adorned, he negotiates safe passage and sails for Persia. The tyranny that built so magnificently is over. But what replaces it will reshape human civilization more profoundly than any temple. 2 years of factional struggle follow. The aristocrat Isagoras attempts to seize control with Spartan backing. His rival Cleisthenes, of the powerful Alcmaeonid family, takes a step no Greek nobleman has taken before. He turns to the common people. When Isagoras and his Spartan garrison occupy the Acropolis in 508, the demos of Athens rises. Ordinary citizens besiege the sacred rock, forcing the garrison to withdraw. The people have tasted collective power. Cleisthenes gives that power permanent form. His reforms are architectural in the deepest sense. They rebuild the city's political structure as deliberately as masons lay courses of stone. The four ancient Ionian tribes, dominated by aristocratic kinship networks, are abolished. In their place rise 10 new tribes, each composed of demes drawn from 3 separate regions, the city, the coast, and the inland, so that no tribe belongs to a single locality or a single clan. The deme becomes the fundamental unit of citizenship. A man is no longer son of his father's lineage alone. He is a citizen of his deme, registered in its rolls, voting in its assembly. The physical city transforms to house this new order. On the western edge of the Agora, a new building rises, the Bouleuterion, council house of the 500. 50 men from each tribe, chosen by lot, serve for 1 year. They meet in a modest rectangular hall, its wooden benches arranged to face inward, its roof supported by internal columns. Here legislation is prepared before it reaches the full assembly. The smell of lamp oil and fresh plaster fills the chamber at dawn as councillors arrive. The assembly itself moves to the Nix, a hillside southwest of the Agora, where the natural slope creates a theatre of citizenship. A curved retaining wall carves a level platform from the rock. Here, any adult male citizen may speak. The bema, a low stone step, is the only elevation that separates speaker from audience. 6,000 men gathered on bare hillside, voting by show of hands under open sky. No roof, no walls, no throne. The architecture of democracy is deliberately minimal, almost austere. And then there is the strangest innovation: ostracism. Each year the assembly votes on whether to hold an ostracism. If they choose yes, citizens scratch a name onto a potsherd, an ostracon, and deposit it in the Agora. The man who receives the most votes, provided 6,000 are cast in total, must leave Athens for 10 years. No trial, no crime, no confiscation of property. It is preventive surgery against tyranny, performed by the collective hand. The first ostracism falls in 487 before the Common Era, but the mechanism exists from the start, a warning etched in broken pottery. Archaeologists have recovered more than 7,000 ostraca from the Agora and the Kerameikos, small curved fragments bearing scratched names in uneven hands. Some are barely literate, the letters reversed or misspelled. Others carry insults alongside the name. These shards are the most intimate surviving artifacts of democratic practice, the physical residue of individual political will, held in the palm, scored with a nail or a sharp stone, then dropped into a container and counted. The city that emerges from Cleisthenes' reforms is not yet the Athens of Pericles. Its temples still bear the scars of tyranny's ambitions, half finished. Its fleet is small. But its political infrastructure, assembly, council, courts, tribes, demes, and the annual lottery of office, is complete. The bones of democracy are set in place, and the city grows around them like living tissue around a skeleton. Within a generation, this system will face the greatest military power in the known world, and the Democratic Assembly will vote, by show of hands on the open Nix, to fight. That fight comes sooner than anyone expects. In 490 before the Common Era, a Persian expeditionary force crosses the Aegean. burns Eretria on the island of Euboea, and lands on the coastal plain of Marathon, roughly 40 kilometers northeast of Athens. The Democratic Assembly debates and votes. 10,000 Athenian hoplites, joined by perhaps 1,000 Plataeans, march out to meet an empire that stretches from the Indus to the shores of Ionia. The plain is flat, hemmed by mountains and marsh, ground chosen by the Persians for their cavalry. The Athenian generals thin their centre and strengthen both wings. When the charge comes, it covers the final distance at a run, closing the gap before Persian archers can shatter the line. The wings fold inward. The rout drives the invaders back to their ships. 192 Athenians fall. The burial mound at Marathon, 10 meters high, still marks the ground where their cremated remains were interred beneath the earth they held. The victory electrifies the city but does not end the danger. Athens knows the great king will return. In 483 before the Common Era, a rich new vein of silver is struck at the mines of Laurion in southern Attica. The assembly faces a choice: distribute the windfall among the citizens or build a fleet. A politician named Themistocles argues for ships. The vote carries. 200 triremes are laid down in the shipyards of Piraeus, long, narrow warships requiring 170 oarsmen each. Athens transforms itself from a land power into a naval state in less than 3 years. The Persian response, when it comes in 480, is overwhelming. Xerxes crosses the Hellespont on a bridge of boats with an army numbering in the hundreds of thousands. A Greek force delays the advance at Thermopylae for 3 days before being outflanked and destroyed. The road to Attica lies open. The Athenian assembly votes to evacuate the entire city. Women, children, and the elderly are ferried to Troezen, Aegina, and Salamis. The men board the fleet. Athens empties. The Persians enter an abandoned city. On the Acropolis, a small garrison of temple stewards and diehards barricades itself behind wooden palisades. The Persians find a path up the north cliff face, overwhelm the defenders, and set fire to everything on the summit. The older Parthenon, the great limestone temple begun after Marathon, its columns already standing but its roof incomplete, burns. The archaic temples with their painted pediments, the treasuries, the wooden cult images, the votive offerings accumulated over generations, all are consumed or smashed. Flames lick across painted marble. The beautiful archaic chorai, those standing maidens with their elaborate drapery and traces of red and blue pigment, topple from their bases and shatter across the sacred ground. Then comes Salamis. The Greek fleet, anchored in the narrow strait between the island and the mainland, draws the Persian navy into confined waters where numbers count for less than seamanship. The triremes built with Laurian silver ram and sink the enemy in a single September day. Xerxes watches from a throne set on the shore. The following spring, at Plataea in 479, the combined Greek army destroys the Persian land force left behind under Mardonius. The invasion is over. What remains on the Acropolis is ruin. Charred column drums of Pentelic marble, cracked by heat, lie among heaps of shattered sculpture. The Athenians do not rebuild immediately. According to later tradition, the oath of Plataea binds the Greeks to leave the destroyed sanctuaries as memorials of Persian sacrilege. Whether or not the oath is historical, the archaeological record confirms that no major temple rises on the summit for a full generation. Instead, the Athenians do something remarkable with the wreckage. The scorched column drums of the unfinished Parthenon are built visibly into the north wall of the Acropolis, deliberately exposed, a permanent scar in the fortification. The broken chori and damaged votives are gathered reverently and buried in deep pits on the summit, sealed beneath fill. There they will remain, untouched for nearly 24 centuries, until excavators in the 1880s uncover them, their painted surfaces still faintly glowing, their archaic smiles intact beneath the ash. For a generation, the scarred rock stands open to the sky. The oath holds. Athens fights, trades, grows rich, but does not rebuild. The Delian League, formed in 478 before the Common Era to prosecute the war against Persia, channels tribute from nearly 200 allied states into a treasury kept on the sacred island of Delos. Athenian triremes patrol the Aegean. Silver flows from the mines at Lorion. And still the Acropolis remains a ruin, its broken pediments a rebuke to Persian arrogance and a reminder of collective sacrifice. Then, in 454, the League treasury is transferred from Delos to Athens. The justification is security. The effect is transformation. 1/60th of every annual tribute, over 400 talents accumulating year upon year, now rests in Athena's keeping. And Pericles, strategos elected repeatedly from 461 onward, proposes what no Athenian has dared, to spend allied funds on the goddess's house. The decision is controversial. Thucydides, son of Milesius, leads opposition in the assembly, calling it tyranny dressed in marble. Pericles answers that Athens owes the allies protection, not an accounting of how the surplus is spent. The assembly votes. Thucydides is ostracized. Construction begins. In 447 before the Common Era, the architects Iktinos and Callicrates lay the foundations of the Parthenon atop the platform of the older Persian-burned temple. The scale is unprecedented for a Doric building. 8 columns across the front, rather than the standard 6, 17 along the flanks. Every drum is quarried from Mount Pentelicon, 11 kilometers to the northeast, where the marble emerges white with a faint golden grain that will deepen to honey over centuries of sunlight. The refinements are invisible to the casual eye, but absolute in their precision. The stylobate curves upward at its center by roughly 6 centimeters, correcting the optical illusion of sagging. Columns lean inward by fractions of a degree. Corner columns are slightly thicker, compensating for the thinning effect of open sky behind them. No straight line exists in the building. Every surface breathes with calculated deviation from the mechanical. Above the columns, 92 metopes depict gods battling giants, Greeks fighting Amazons, Lapiths struggling with centaurs, civilization holding chaos at bay. The continuous Ionic frieze, running 160 meters around the inner cellar wall, shows the Panathenaic procession. Horsemen, musicians, sacrificial animals, maidens carrying peplos cloth, all converging toward the eastern entrance where gods sit watching. Inside the cellar, Pheidias constructs the chryselephantine Athena Parthenos. The statue stands nearly 11 meters tall. Its core is wooden, sheathed in carved ivory for flesh, and removable gold plates, over 1,000 kilograms of refined gold, for drapery, helmet, and shield. The goddess holds Nike in her outstretched right hand. A shallow pool of water before the base reflects light upward onto the ivory, preventing it from cracking in the dry attic air. The cost of the statue alone approaches the equivalent of the entire Athenian fleet. By 432, 15 years after the first stone was set, the Parthenon is complete. The total expenditure reaches somewhere near 460 talents of silver, a sum that could fund a major naval campaign. Yet the building is not merely expensive. It is perfect in a way that no Greek temple has been before, every surface resolved, every proportion singing against the blue Attic sky. The quarries on Pentelicon still bear the scars of extraction, rectangular sockets where iron wedges split the living rock. Marble dust settles on the slopes. Ox carts groan down the mountain road. On the Acropolis summit, masons tap with bronze and iron, fitting drums without mortar, each joint so precise that a knife blade cannot enter the seam. The smell of fresh-cut stone mingles with incense from the older shrines still standing nearby. Athens has answered the Persian fire not with grief, but with geometry, raising from the ashes a building that will define the word temple for every civilization that follows. Even as the Parthenon nears completion, the sacred rock is not finished. It has gained its crown jewel, but the approach remains unworthy, a narrow ramp, cramped and ancient, threading between older walls. In 437 before the Common Era, work begins on the propylaea, a monumental gateway designed by the architect Mnesicles to transform the act of arrival into something close to revelation. The structure rises at the steep western end of the Acropolis, where the ground pitches sharply upward. Mnesicles solves the grade change with breathtaking confidence. A central hall of 6 Doric columns on the outer face, 6 more on the inner, flanked by 2 asymmetrical wings. Inside, tall Ionic columns line the processional corridor, their slender shafts of Pentelic marble carrying a coffered ceiling painted with gold stars against deep blue. The shift from Doric exterior to Ionic interior is deliberate, severity yielding to grace as the visitor passes from the profane city into sacred space. Massive marble beams span the ceiling, some weighing over 11 tons, lifted and placed with a precision that still astonishes structural engineers. Iron bars concealed within the architrave reinforce spans that marble alone could not sustain. The smell of fresh paint, Egyptian blue, red ochre, gilt, hangs in the passage where light falls in long shafts through the colonnade. The Peloponnesian War interrupts. After 432, funds tighten, and the propylaea remains technically unfinished, its south wing truncated, wall surfaces left without final dressing. Yet even incomplete, it is the grandest secular building in Greece, a threshold between the mortal city below and the divine precinct above. On the tiny bastion projecting from the propylaea's south flank, the diminutive temple of Athena Nike takes shape around 427. Designed by Callicrates, it is an amphiprostyle structure barely 8 meters long, 4 Ionic columns at each end framing views across the Saronic Gulf. Its sculptured frieze depicts Greeks and Persians in combat, and along the parapet, figures of winged victory bend to adjust their sandals, marble carved so thin that drapery clings to the body beneath as if wet. This is the goddess who grants triumph, stationed at the very edge of the cliff where every citizen ascending can glimpse her silhouette against open sky. Below and to the north, the most complex building on the Acropolis begins to rise in 421. The Erechtheion occupies ground so sacred and so uneven that no simple plan will serve. Here stands the ancient olive-wood image of Athena Polias, the city's oldest cult object, dressed in a new peplos every 4 years. Here is the mark where Poseidon's trident struck the rock, and the salt spring that answered. Here grows the sacred olive tree, and here lies the tomb shrine of Cecrops, the legendary serpent king. The architects respond to this layered holiness with a building of extraordinary asymmetry. The eastern porch, 6 Ionic columns tall and luminous, shelters the entrance to Athena's chamber. The ground drops sharply to the north, where a deeper porch of 6 more Ionic columns stands 3 meters lower, its floor covering the trident mark and the salt water. On the south face, instead of columns, 6 female figures bear the entablature on their heads. The caryatids, each carved from a single block of marble, standing with one knee slightly bent, their drapery falling in vertical flutes that echo the channeling of columns. They carry weight as architecture, yet they breathe as sculpture. Their hair is braided thickly at the back to strengthen the stone neck against the load above. Light moves across these surfaces through the long afternoons, warm on the caryatids' faces at sunset, cool in the deep north porch at dawn. Incense drifts from the chamber where the olive-wood goddess stands in her robes. Lamps burn with olive oil pressed from trees descended, Athenians believe, from the one Athena herself planted. By 406 before the Common Era, the Erechtheion is essentially complete. The Acropolis now holds its full constellation: Parthenon, Propylaea, Nike Temple, Erechtheion, each building answering the others in marble and light. No city in the Greek world possesses anything comparable. The sacred rock has become a single architectural composition, visible from the sea, from the plains of Attica, from the decks of warships returning to Piraeus. But even as the last caryatid receives her final polish, the war that will break the empire grinds on, and the silver that built these stones flows now into hulls and spearheads and the wages of men who will not come home. Below the marble summit, the city breathes. Dawn light strikes the Acropolis and slides downhill into the broad, unpaved rectangle of the Agora, where Athens conducts the daily business of being alive. This open ground, roughly 250 meters on its longest axis, is the most important piece of flat earth in the democratic world. Here citizens vote, argue, buy fish, serve on juries, and encounter philosophers who will not let them pass without examination. The morning begins with commerce. Vendors arrange their goods under temporary awnings: olives, figs, garlic, eels from Lake Copais, cheese wrapped in leaves. The fish market draws the sharpest haggling. Nearby barbers set up stools where men sit and talk politics while blades scrape their jaws. The smell is immediate: charcoal smoke, animal dung, crushed herbs, the mineral tang of fresh-cut marble from workshops along the western edge. Potters labor in the Kerameikos quarter just beyond the Dipylon gate, their kilns sending columns of heat into the sky, their hands shaping the red figure lekythoi and craters that will carry Athenian images across the Mediterranean. Along the Agora's north side stands the Stoa Poikila, the painted Stoa, its interior walls bearing enormous panel paintings depicting Marathon, the fall of Troy, the Battle of Oinoe. Citizens pause beneath its colonnade to study these scenes, and later the philosopher Zeno will teach here, giving the Stoic school its name. Opposite, the South Stoa provides shade for magistrates and money changers. The Tholos, a round building near the western edge, houses the 50 Prytanes, who serve as the standing committee of the Council of 500. A third of them sleep here every night, ensuring that the democracy never lacks a functioning government, even at 3 in the morning. Justice operates on an industrial scale. Each year, 6,000 citizens over the age of 30 volunteer for jury service. On trial days, they gather at the northeast entrance, where a remarkable machine determines their assignment. The Cleroterion, a tall stone slab pierced with rows of narrow slots, accepts bronze identity tickets. A tube running down one side releases black and white balls at random. White means service, black means dismissal. No official, no wealthy patron, no bribe can predict the outcome. The machine makes corruption nearly impossible. Once seated, jurors cast their verdicts using small bronze discs, each fitted with a central axle, solid for acquittal, hollow for condemnation. The juror conceals the axle between thumb and forefinger so that no observer can read the vote. These discs survive in the archaeological record, their worn surfaces still carrying the pressure of anonymous democratic hands. Water clocks regulate the length of speeches. A ceramic vessel with a small hole near its base drains at a fixed rate. When the water runs out, the speaker stops. Rhetoric must be efficient. The democracy has no patience for men who waste its time. Domestic life unfolds behind blank exterior walls. Athenian houses turn inward around small courtyards, their rooms modest, a men's dining room for symposia, separate women's quarters on the upper floor, a kitchen with a portable clay hearth. Light enters through the courtyard. Privacy is fierce. Women of citizen families rarely appear in the Agora. Slaves and metics handle much of the daily purchasing. By the 4th century before the Common Era, the Agora has accumulated layers of civic architecture, the Metrone housing state archives, the Stoa of Zeus Eleutherios, the monument of the eponymous heroes where proposed legislation is posted for public reading. Every surface carries information. The democracy is a system that requires constant physical participation, walking to the assembly on the Nix, standing in jury lines, reading notices carved in stone. It is exhausting, and it is deliberate. Self-governance demands the body as well as the mind. The Agora never sleeps entirely. Night watchmen patrol. Stray dogs nose through market refuse. Oil lamps flicker behind shuttered windows in the surrounding neighborhoods. And somewhere in the darkness, a water clock drips steadily, measuring time that belongs to no king, no priest, only to the citizens who will fill this square again at dawn. The plague arrives in the 2nd year of the war. It comes through Piraeus in the summer of 430 before the Common Era, carried by ship from the eastern Mediterranean into a city swollen beyond its capacity. Pericles' strategy has drawn the rural population of Attica behind the long walls, trusting the navy to fight while the land army stays sheltered. The result is catastrophic density. Tens of thousands of refugees camped in makeshift shelters between the parallel walls, in temple precincts, in every alley and courtyard of a city built for far fewer bodies. The sickness moves through this compressed humanity with terrible speed. Thucydides, who contracts it and survives, records the progression: violent heat in the head, redness of the eyes, bleeding in the throat, then the disease descending through the chest and stomach, finally attacking the extremities. The dead lie unburied in the streets. Sacred laws collapse. Funeral pyres burn continuously, and families throw their dead onto pyres already lit by strangers. In the Kerameikos cemetery, archaeologists have uncovered a mass burial shaft from this period, approximately 150 bodies placed hastily in a single pit, without the careful grave goods that normally accompany Athenian dead. The bones show no signs of violence. These are plague victims interred in desperation. Between 75,000 and 100,000 people die over 4 years. Among them, in 429, is Pericles himself. The city loses not only its strategist but its confidence. The generation that built the Parthenon watches its children carried to unmarked graves. Yet the war continues. Athens fights Sparta for 27 years, and the plague is only the first catastrophe. In 415, the assembly votes to send an enormous expedition against Syracuse in Sicily. 200 triremes, thousands of hoplites, the largest armada Athens has ever launched. By 413, the entire force is destroyed. The army is slaughtered or enslaved in the stone quarries of Syracuse. 40,000 men do not return. The harbour at Piraeus falls quiet. Sparta, funded now by Persian gold, builds a fleet to match the Athenian navy. In 405, at Aegospotami on the Hellespont, the Spartan admiral Lysander catches the Athenian fleet beached and unprepared. 170 ships are captured. Only 9 escape. Athens has no fleet, no grain supply from the Black Sea, no allies willing to resist. The siege is brief. By spring of 404, the city surrenders. Sparta's terms are delivered. The long walls must be demolished, the fleet reduced to 12 ships, the empire dissolved. Theban and Corinthian allies urge total destruction, the razing of Athens as Athens had razed Melos. Sparta refuses, citing Athens' service against Persia. But the walls come down. Flute girls play as Spartan soldiers, and Athenian labourers together pull apart the massive limestone blocks that once guaranteed the city's lifeline to the sea. Thucydides does not record this scene, but Xenophon does. The music, the demolition, the belief among Greeks that this day marks the beginning of freedom for Hellas. In the city, Sparta installs a narrow oligarchy. 30 men, chosen for their anti-democratic sympathies, assume absolute power. They execute without trial, confiscate property, strip 1,500 citizens of their lives within 8 months. The Agora, built for open deliberation, becomes a place of fear. The bronze ballots gather dust. But the democratic instinct proves harder to kill than the democratic fleet. In 403, exiled Democrats under Thrasybulus seize the hill fortress of Philae, then Piraeus. Civil war flares briefly, the 30 fall. Democracy is restored, battered, impoverished, stripped of empire, but functioning. The assembly meets again on the Nix. Jurors draw lots. The water clocks resume their dripping. The city that emerges is smaller in power, but unbroken in form. Its walls will be rebuilt. Its philosophers will still teach. But the imperial confidence that raised the Parthenon is gone, spent in plague pits and Sicilian quarries, and the rubble of the long walls hauled away to the sound of flutes. The city that rebuilds itself after 403 before the Common Era is no longer an imperial capital. It is something else, a place where thought itself becomes the primary export, where groves of olive and plane trees shelter conversations that will outlast every fleet Athens ever launched. Northwest of the Dipylon Gate, Along the road to Eleusis, a walled garden surrounds a gymnasium sacred to the hero Academos. Here, around 387 before the Common Era, Plato establishes his school. The grounds are modest: shaded walks, an altar to the Muses, a small library. Students gather in the open air or beneath colonnades, working through geometry and dialectic. The academy will endure for nearly 9 centuries, longer than the democracy that gave it birth. A generation later, Aristotle returns from Macedon and founds his own school east of the city walls, in the precinct of Apollo-Lykeos. The Lyceum's covered walkway, the Peripatos, gives his followers their name. Here natural philosophy flourishes, specimens catalogued, constitutions compared, the logic of syllogism formalized. The smell of pressed herbs and dried animal skins mingles with the dust of the wrestling ground. Athens in the 4th century recovers materially. The orator Lycurgus, controlling public finances from 338 to 326 before the Common Era, transforms the city's infrastructure. He completes the theatre of Dionysus in stone, 17,000 limestone seats carved into the south slope of the Acropolis, replacing the old wooden benches. He enlarges the stadium for the Panathenaic Games, rebuilds the arsenal at Piraeus, and restores temples neglected during decades of war. Yet political sovereignty slips away. At Chaeronea in 338, Philip of Macedon's cavalry shatters the allied Greek line. Athens retains its institutions, its courts, its festivals, but foreign garrisons now shadow every decision. After Alexander's death, the city revolts and fails. Macedonian soldiers occupy Piraeus. The property qualification for citizenship rises, democracy narrows to oligarchy, and back again with each shift in Hellenistic power. What compensates is patronage. The Hellenistic kings, eager for cultural prestige, lavish marble on the city their tutors came from. Attalos II of Pergamon, around 150 before the Common Era, funds a magnificent 2-story stoa along the eastern edge of the Agora, 115 meters of Doric columns below, Ionic above, with 42 shops behind. Its Hymetian marble steps become a promenade for merchants and philosophers alike. Near the Roman Agora, the astronomer Andronikos of Kyros builds the Tower of the Winds around 50 before the Common Era, an octagonal marble clock tower with sundials on each face, a water clock within, and a bronze Triton weather vane turning on the peak. 8 carved wind gods mark the cardinal and intercardinal directions. It is precision engineering dressed in elegance. Through these centuries, the schools endure as Athens's true power. Stoics teach in the painted stoa. Epicureans gather in a private garden. The city becomes a university town, drawing young Romans who arrive to polish their Greek and absorb philosophy before entering public life. The Acropolis gleams above, but the intellectual gravity has shifted downhill to libraries, lecture halls, and shaded colonnades where argument matters more than empire. By 146 before the Common Era, when Rome destroys Corinth and absorbs Greece into provincial administration, Athens has already made its accommodation. It offers no military resistance. It offers instead what no legion can produce: the accumulated prestige of Plato's garden, Aristotle's walkway, and marble monuments funded by kings who understood that to build in Athens was to borrow eternity. The accommodation holds until it does not. In 86 before the Common Era, Lucius Cornelius Sulla besieges Athens for its ill-judged alliance with Mithridates of Pontus. His legions breach the walls between the Sacred Gate and the Dipylon on the 1st of March. The sack is methodical. Trees of the academy are felled for siege works. The Piraeus arsenals burn. Blood runs through the Kerameikos. Sulla strips gold from the Acropolis dedications, melts temple offerings into coin. Yet he spares the monuments themselves, not from mercy, but from calculation. Even a Roman general understands that to raise the Parthenon would diminish the prestige of his own conquest. The city that emerges from Sulla's departure is physically diminished, but symbolically intact. Its population has thinned. Its walls stand broken in places for a generation. But the schools reopen, the festivals resume, and Rome, having punished, begins to patronize. Augustus constructs a new marketplace east of the old Agora, the Roman Agora, a colonnaded rectangle with a monumental gate of Pentelic marble facing west. It is a commercial space, not a democratic one. No assembly meets here, no jury is allotted. Goods are weighed, taxes collected, edicts posted. The Tower of the Winds, already standing nearby from the previous century, now anchors a district that serves Roman administrative order rather than Athenian civic debate. But the true Roman transformation of the skyline comes under Hadrian. The emperor who loves Greek culture more than any predecessor arrives in Athens in 124 of the Common Era and returns repeatedly. He completes what Pisistratos began 6.5 centuries earlier, the Temple of Olympian Zeus. 104 Corinthian columns of Pentelic marble, each 17 meters tall, rise at last around the colossal chryselephantine cult image. The dedication occurs in 132. A new arch marks the boundary between Old Athens and Hadrian's city, its western face inscribed declaring this the ancient city of Theseus, its eastern face proclaiming the city of Hadrian. The distinction is architectural fact. East of the arch, a new quarter spreads with a library complex, whose 100 columns frame a reflecting pool, reading rooms lined with papyrus scrolls, and lecture halls where philosophy continues under imperial patronage. Herodes Atticus, the wealthiest Athenian of the 2nd century, builds the great Odeon against the south slope of the Acropolis, around 161. A roofed theatre seating 5,000, its facade of 3 arched stories rising in dressed stone. Cedar beams span the auditorium without interior supports. Music, rhetoric, and dramatic performance fill a space whose acoustics carry a whispered line to the highest tier. Athens in this era is a city of monuments without sovereignty. Its population perhaps reaches 30,000 free residents. Students arrive from across the empire, young men from Syria, North Africa, Gaul, to study rhetoric and philosophy. The Panathenaic festival still processes up the sacred way. Sacrificial smoke still rises from the Acropolis altars. But every major building of the Roman period is a gift, from emperors, from wealthy benefactors, from a system that values Athens as ornament rather than power. The Agora fills with new structures, the Odeon of Agrippa at its center, a library, honorific statues on every available base. The old democratic spaces, the Bouleuterion, the law courts, still stand, but their function has narrowed to local administration under Roman oversight. The city governs itself in matters of festival and market. Rome governs everything else. For 2 centuries, this arrangement produces stability and splendor. The marble gleams, the schools flourish, The harbour at Piraeus handles modest trade. Athens is not rich by imperial standards, but it is beautiful and it is revered. Pilgrims come to see the Parthenon as tourists, not worshippers. The city has become its own museum, living, breathing, teaching, but no longer deciding its own fate. The walls, patched since Sulla, grow old. No serious threat has tested them in generations. When the threat finally comes, in 267 of the Common Era, those walls will prove fatally inadequate. They come from the Black Sea in the autumn of 267 of the Common Era. The Heruli, a Germanic seafaring people riding a wave of raids that has already broken across the Aegean, find Athens defended by walls that have not been seriously tested in 3 centuries. The garrison is small. The old Themistoclean circuit, patched and repatched, stretches too far for the available defenders. The Heruli breach it within days. What follows is devastation on a scale the city has not known since the Persian sack 747 years earlier. The Agora burns. The Stoa of Attalos, the Odeon of Agrippa, private houses, workshops, libraries, fire consumes them indiscriminately. The Acropolis, steep and defensible, may have held out, but the lower city is gutted. Marble cracks in the heat. Roof tiles shatter. The philosophical schools lose their libraries. When the raiders withdraw, laden with plunder, Athens is a shell. The response is immediate and brutal in its pragmatism. Within a generation, a new fortification wall rises, not around the old generous circuit, but around a drastically reduced area. This post-Herulian wall cuts directly through the ancient Agora, cannibalizing its ruined buildings for material. Column drums, inscribed statue bases, and architrave blocks become fill. The democratic heart of the city vanishes beneath a defensive barrier. The new Athens huddles north of the Acropolis, a fraction of its former extent. Yet the schools survive. Philosophy continues in private houses and modest lecture halls. Neoplatonist teachers draw students from across the Mediterranean for another 2.5 centuries. Athens is no longer grand, but it remains intellectually alive until 529 of the Common Era, when the Emperor Justinian orders the closure of the pagan philosophical schools. The last teachers of the academy, heirs to a tradition stretching back 900 years to Plato's olive grove, disperse. Some travel to Persia. The intellectual light that defined Athens longer than any empire dims to nothing. The Parthenon endures, but transformed. By the 6th century, it has become a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Workers cut an apse into the eastern wall, paint frescoes over the ancient cella, and remove the great doors to create a basilica nave. The building that housed Pheidias's gold and ivory Athena now holds an altar and an episcopal throne. The metopes depicting pagan myth remain overhead, reinterpreted or ignored. Centuries pass in obscurity. Medieval Athens is a provincial town, fought over by Franks, Catalans, and Florentines after the Fourth Crusade of 1204. The Acropolis becomes a feudal fortress, the Propylaea a ducal palace. In 1456, Ottoman forces take the city. The Parthenon becomes a mosque. A minaret rises from its southwest corner. The Erechtheion serves as a harem for the garrison commander. Yet the structures stand, adapted, inhabited, structurally sound. Then comes the evening of the 26th of September, 1687. A Venetian army under Francesco Morosini besieges the Ottoman garrison on the Acropolis. The Ottomans have stored gunpowder inside the Parthenon, believing no Christian army would fire on the ancient temple. They are wrong. A Venetian mortar shell arcs over the propylaea and strikes the roof. The explosion tears the building apart. The central cellar disintegrates. 28 columns on the long sides collapse. Sculptures that survived 21 centuries shatter in an instant. Smoke rises from the sacred rock, and when it clears, the Parthenon is a ruin, roofless, gutted, open to the sky. The silence that follows is the silence of 14 centuries of transformation made suddenly, violently final. For more than a century after Morosini's mortar shell, the Acropolis remains an Ottoman garrison. Houses cluster against the Parthenon's broken columns. A small mosque stands within the roofless cellar. The Erechtheion serves as a harem residence. Below, the ancient Agora lies buried beneath a dense Ottoman neighborhood, streets, wells, and cellars pressing down upon marble pavements no living person remembers. Then Greece wins its independence. In 1834, Athens becomes capital of the new kingdom. Almost immediately the question arises, what lies beneath? The first clearances begin on the Acropolis itself. Ottoman and Frankish structures are removed stone by stone. By 1836, the small mosque inside the Parthenon is demolished. Workers uncover the medieval apse that once made the temple a church. Layer by layer, the sacred rock sheds its later skins. In 1863, excavators find the archaic chorai, those painted marble maidens buried by Athenians after the Persian sack of 480 before the Common Era, still lying in the fill where they were reverently interred 23 centuries earlier. Their paint still clings, red lips, blue diadems, traces of a world before the Parthenon. The Agora waits longer. Not until 1931 does the American School of Classical Studies begin systematic excavation of the ancient civic center. The scale is extraordinary. Nearly 400 modern buildings must be purchased and removed, houses, shops, churches, an entire neighborhood lifted away to reach the democratic heart of Athens. Trenches descend through Ottoman, Byzantine, Roman, and Hellenistic layers. Gradually, the outlines of the ancient square emerge. The Stoa Poakiles foundations, the Bouleuterion where the council met, the Tholos where the Prytaneas dined, the altar of the 12 gods that once served as the city's central milestone. From the excavation soil come the small objects that speak loudest. Over 7,000 ostraca, pottery shards scratched with the names of citizens proposed for exile. Themistocles, Aristides, Cimon, the names of the great appear in dozens of different hands, each shard a single anonymous vote. Bronze ballots emerge too, their axles solid or hollow to mark acquittal or condemnation. Fragments of the Cleroterion, the allotment machine that randomly assigned jurors, surface in pieces. These are not monuments. They are the machinery of self-governance, small enough to hold in one hand, powerful enough to have shaped the political imagination of the world. In 1956, the Stoa of Attalos is reconstructed on its original foundations, using ancient techniques and Pentelic marble, becoming both museum and demonstration of Hellenistic scale. Visitors walk its colonnade and grasp, physically, the proportions of public space that once framed Athenian civic life. On the Acropolis, conservation becomes its own discipline. The caryatids of the Erechtheion, eroded by acid rain and vibration, are removed to a climate-controlled museum in 1979 and replaced by casts. The new Acropolis Museum, opened in 2009, displays them at eye level. 6 marble women bearing the weight of a porch and 24 centuries of weather, their drapery still flowing. In 1987, the Acropolis receives inscription on the World Heritage List. But the true legacy is not the designation. It is what the stones taught when they were finally read with patience. That a city of potters and jurors, of fish sellers and philosophers, built something unprecedented on this limestone rock. Not merely temples, but a system. The ostraca prove it. The ballots prove it. The jury machines prove it. Athens did not merely imagine democracy. It administered it daily in dust and clay and bronze. The Agora lies open now under the Attic sun, its marble thresholds worn smooth by feet that walked here when the world was being invented. The silence is no longer the silence of loss. It is the silence of a story fully told, waiting to be heard again. Thank you for walking these ancient streets across every episode of this journey. If the stones of Athens have spoken to you, consider subscribing so you will not miss the next city whose story waits to be told.